Advent is an ancient Latin term that is thousands of years old, and it means to come. And generally, the period of Advent are the 4 weeks before the birth of the Christ child and the actual birth of the Christ child, at least in Christian tradition. But I want you to know, if you don't already remember, the Christians swiped everything they possibly could from the pagans. So when the pagan worship was what was abroad in the land when the Christians arrived, when the Israelites arrived. And so you've got a lot of goddess stuff and earth stuff and a lot of pagan. Pagan isn't wrong. Pagan was just what was here. And they had like the solstice. So the winter solstice was Wednesday night, and we celebrated it here, and it was beautiful. And isn't it interesting that somehow Christmas comes right after it? So Christian worship, Christmas, it's all, I don't know, it's one of those things that is ancient, and just because we celebrated doesn't mean it wasn't celebrated years and years and years before us. By the early 4th century, Constantine made Christianity a state religion in about 385, something like that. And when you make something a state religion, it changed the whole concept of it. And what was happening then was that Christians then had to spend like 40 days getting prepared to be a Christian. It isn't like you could just walk up to somebody at a table and sort of sign up and say, "Hi, I'm here, I want to be a Christian." You had to study, you had to tithe, you had to meditate. It took 40 days, and it culminated in the celebration of the solstice or Christmas Eve. Then 1,000 years later, Advent wreaths appeared somewhere during the Protestant Reformation. And we still use that. 1,800 years later, we're still putting out an Advent wreath. It's the circle of life. It's the endless eternity of spirit. It's the never-endingness of what we are. The candles at that time came to represent the virtues of Jesus. Jesus was thought to bring hope, peace, love, joy. And then tomorrow night we light the white candle. It all culminates in the light of Christ that dwells in all of us. And, that's all very tidy. You could go home from here and you've had a nice Advent lesson, and you could learn about the wreath, and people put them in their own homes. But the thing I think we're missing is the fact that Advent was rooted in revolution. When the Romans came, the Christians already had, the followers of Jesus, there was already worship abroad in the land. And the Romans came, and not only did they overcome the government, and they overcame the temples, and they really sort of, they did rule everything. They brought their gods. And so Christianity believed in one God, and the Romans believed in a bunch of gods. God of light, God of this, God of that. And so to become a Christian wasn't just a passive acceptance of I believe in something. To become a Christian was to join the revolution. And it took 40 days. And you had to study, and you had to practice, and you had to know what you were about. But it wasn't just an acceptance of the status quo. There's nothing passive at all about Advent. And what the Christians were doing was they were trying to restore healing and wholeness, somehow trying to find joy in the darkness. So this year that's exactly right. Whoa. I was trying to figure out what joy might mean to all of us here currently. And I thought to myself, first thing I thought was, well, joy's not wishful thinking. All right? How many of us say, if I could lose 10 pounds, then I'd be happy? If I could buy a new car, then I'd be happy. Ooh, if I could just get that new dress, then I'll be happy. Maybe I could have a new relationship, then I'll be happy. Joy is not wishful thinking. Too often we think, if I can have this, then that. And we struggle to find joy in just the sheer joy of being. Just the sheer loving of what we have. The loving of who we are and where we are. Just knowing that we're fine right here, right now, in this place, and we don't have to change a thing. But you know, here at home, I would bet that if you go out to the mall or finish off your shopping or whatever you're going to do today, go out and ask the first person you see and say, "Are you happy? Does a state of joy exist for you?" Well, after they stop laughing, the answer is probably no. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, they're Unity co-founders, and Charles wrote that joy means spiritual happiness expressed through our divine ideas. It's our divine ideas that express joy. Joy is based on the divine law of love, not acquiring of things, not the sort of changing ways of being. Joy is based on the divine law of love. But to do that, we must incorporate joy into our very way of being. For until such time as we discover joy, it's almost impossible to have faith. And without faith, there can be no peace. And without peace, it's really hard for love. It's all like building blocks. Those candles have names for a reason. It's hope, peace, love, joy. They build on one another. They're not independent. Okay, so now we figured out joy isn't wishful thinking. Joy is something that we are. And we practice our principles, our spiritual principles here. And principle 3 is our minds create our reality. So, if we're strung out, there's no joy. And then, if we're strung out, then what is our reality? How do we create love? Where does this divine idea come from? When all we want to do is express anger. If you're turning on the television, turn it off. I'm quite smitten with Peanuts, actually. And Lucy is really a curmudgeon. Lucy, who gives Charlie Brown such a bad idea all the time. She's really hard for him. And occasionally, Lucy goes out in some comic strip and rages at the darkness. She will stand there and say, "Stupid darkness." And yet, isn't that something that we want to do? We need to pull back from that. We need to shut it off if we can. We need to find ways, all of us, to create joy, for we create it. At the time when the early Christians were looking for wholeness, they were looking for recovery, and we can do the same thing. For this is very much a revolutionary period for all of us, no matter where we are, no matter how we stand. And it's time to take our anger and turn it into passion. The thing about joy is that we create it. It doesn't fall on us from the sky. The quickest way I know to make ourselves happy is to help someone else. All right? We can do all of that. We can volunteer. We can take care of animals. We can, by the way, I know why everybody loves to watch Facebook. Everybody likes to watch the kittens and the puppies. And how about the one where the horses are romping around in the snow with the balls? Am I watching too much Facebook? Nobody's laughing. No one's admitting that you're looking at it too. But the fact of the matter is, it's sheer joy. The animals are having a sheerly wonderful time. Sheer joy. We create that joy. Help someone. Be there for someone. Give to someone. That's the quickest way I know to make ourselves happy. The other thing that we have to think about is that we really, truly need to watch our languaging. For what we are saying is not creating joy. I heard an interview on NPR, and they were interviewing a linguist who has written a book, and one of the things in this book is she looked up a word which is the only German word I know, and it's Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is the experience of pleasure, joy, or self-satisfaction that comes from learning of or witnessing the troubles, failures, or humiliation of another. Schadenfreude. And what came to my mind, I don't know how many of you are followers in the newspaper, but just recently there was a contractor in San Francisco who completely tore down a house that was built by a famous architect in the mid-century, was really an historic house. He went in, he got a permit to remodel the house, tore the whole house down except for one wall. Somebody turned him into the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission told him that he has to reconstruct the house in its actual original condition. Original condition. They don't even know if they can find the drawings, all right? But you could hear the cheering. You could hear people going, yeah, the guy was a jerk. He shouldn't have torn the house down. He should have known better serves him right. Okay, that's Schadenfreude. Okay, it's the experience of pleasure or joy at the hardship of another. Okay, that's not real joy. Jesus saying, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongues from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. But language has become a slippery slope. My great aunts used to call me on and once in a while wash out my mouth with soap if I said some of the things that are said normally on the radio. Lots of people go and get away with it. Or they refer to, out loud. This is stuff you don't do. These are things you don't say. These are things that get you in a whole lot of trouble in my youth. And now it's like, oh no, just, open your mouth and let whatever wants to pour out. But the fact is, we can't just let whatever comes through our brain pour out our mouth. That is the slippery slope of language, and that isn't creating joy. We live in a world where people are proud to say, my insult is bigger than your insult. I win, you lose, ha ha, Schadenfreude. Marshall Rosenberg wrote a book on nonviolent communication that tells us for centuries our culture has taught us to think and speak in ways that actually perpetuate conflict. Words are not weapons. It isn't open carry on whatever awful thing you can say. Our goal here is to learn to live in joy. We can speak our truth. We can even speak with passion, but we don't beat each other up. There is grace in the spoken word, and it's that grace that develops joy. So a couple of things to remember about joy, because it isn't easy when you first start thinking about it. Fillmore taught us that joy is our birthright. It's part of our very nature. And it reminds us that gladness gives us strength. So think about it. If you feel like you've had a divine idea and you've succeeded with it and you're feeling joy, don't you feel a little stronger? But if if it's not working and you're feeling grumpy and you're getting mad, then you're not as strong as you might be. It's our birthright. It gives us strength, particularly when we focus on spiritual things. Another thing to remember is that joy is based on divine ideas. All of us have divine ideas. Everybody. It's mind, idea, expression. Just because the word divine in front of it doesn't mean you don't have one. Everyone has divine ideas, and our joy is based on that. Divine ideas are based in love. They are building blocks for hope, peace, faith, joy. The first thing is joy is our birthright. Second thing is joy is based on divine ideas. The third thing is joy is not passive. Joy is not something that falls on us from the sky. There is no future tense to the word joy. Joy is right now, right here, right as we are, in this very place. And it's something that we make. It's something that we make and give away. Our minds do create our reality. So it is up to us to create our joy or our outrage. It's up to us to choose. So here we are at Christmas. And Advent has familiar themes of waiting and peacefulness. And I don't know, there seems to be plenty of money around, and people are putting up lights like never before and buying things apparently like never before. And my question to you is, are we happy? In spite of all this, is there joy? You know, waiting works if we live in a world where we know that a little more patience generally does us good. But how does wait, be patient, how does that work in a context of violence and despair? If you're locked out at the border, or you're sleeping on the street, or you can't provide for your family, and someone says, oh, wait, it'll get better. What if we're tired of waiting? What if our patience has run out? What if, try as we may, we have no joy? Remember, Advent is rooted in revolution. Its Advent is rooted in revolution. Is it possible that communities like Marin County, it's beautiful, let's face it, it's lovely, this is a gorgeous room, we're all in a wonderful, blessed, wonderful space, and we have this sort of carefully created experience of this season. It's beautiful, it's lasting, it's moving, it's the trees and the lights, and yet in the middle of all that, are we missing, or are we at least masking our connection to a messy, broken, violent world? Advent was rooted in revolution. We mustn't ever forget that it's ours to do. And how do the recent events, whatever you may see them, in all of their heartbreaking complexity, how is it that those recent events aren't we called to something more? We're called to more than the beauty of the lights in the world. It's wonderful, yes, but we're called to more. Advent invites us to see ourselves as these wonderful quantum particles that can't exist each without the other. We are tangled and we are entangled in such a way that none of us can be described as independent. If you hurt, I hurt. If we have no joy, nobody has any joy. We're entangled, we're all together, and it is up to us to create it. Joy is our birthright, joy is based on divine ideas, and joy is not passive. This season is about keeping our eyes open. It's about keeping alert to injustice, meeting that injustice with love and grace and joy. Joy is not wishful thinking. It is risk and action and the courage to undertake both. And so it is. Amen.